Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. The Wolfpack continues to grow as NC State's men's and women's basketball teams continue to the Final Four. They're not just gaining fans, but also bettors. The Long Shot Pack are paying off for people taking advantage of the first NCAA tournament with sports betting in North Carolina. WRAL Sports Investigative reporter Brian Murphy joins us now. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I just wanted to break down a little bit about what this means. So let's start with the beginning of the tournament. What did it mean for sports betting that we started off with all three Triangle teams in the men's tournament?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd even go back a week before that. Sports betting started, and then there was the ACC tournament.
Right.
And NC State was a long shot to win that. Then you get to the NCAA tournament, and you're right. You know, Duke, North Carolina, and NC State are all in it. They all reached the Sweet 16. Before the tournament, NC State was 200-1 to win the NCAA championship, the national title. That means if you bet $1, you'd win $200. If you bet $10, you'd win $2,000. If you bet $100, you could win $20,000. And they were 50-1 to reach the Final Four, which they have already done. And you got to remember that there was $200 million bet in the first week of sports gambling. A lot of that, $85 million, was free bets, promotional bets. You wonder how many people took those promotional bets and either placed them on Carolina or Duke or NC State.
Yeah, and I actually have a good anecdote of that. My boyfriend actually took advantage of those promotional bets. I don't know the exact amount of how much he put in, but I wasn't very much comparatively, for NC State to make it to the Final Four, just to make it. And sure enough, here we are. So he got a little bit of a chunk of change from that. And, of course, then he realized some of the taxing and stuff like that. So he's working through that. But
And that's happening all over the country. The NC State was the third most bet team to reach the Final Four. That's according to BetMGM, one of the 8 operators that's operating in the state.
There's a bit of feeling of FOMO with a lot of March Madness teams when it comes to betting futures in the tournament. Nobody wants to miss out on the Cinderella run.
You know, you think UConn and Purdue and Houston and North Carolina and all these other teams.
A lot of people were interested in NC State, and then they just kept rolling, and we took money on them to go to the Final Four, third most bet team to make the Final Four, and they're the second most bet team to win the whole thing. So it is really an amazing thing to see happening in Carolina, coinciding with the launch of sports betting there, that a Cinderella run like NC State is happening right now.
And that's a combination, I think, of the long odds, you know, people wanting a big payday, plus they were riding high coming into the tournament. And then I think as they've gone, people have become attracted to their story and have started betting them more and more.
yeah, and so what has that meant each step of the way as they've gone through this? I know you said the odds were really long to start with, and now they're a little bit shorter, but still kind of.
Yeah, they're 16-1. They're still the longest shot in the Final Four. UConn and Purdue are the odds-on favorites to win this thing. But, you know, you could still bet North Carolina State right now at 16-1 to win the entire title. Of course, those who have them at 200-1 are probably trying to decide whether they need to hedge those bets,
Yeah.
find a way to cash out some of that value. But it's been a tremendous ride, and the timing was perfect.
Again, for the state of Carolina, it's been a really magical month of basketball for them. You had 3 teams make the tournament, 3 get to the Sweet 16. You got an all-Carolina Elite 8 matchup, which we were very happy to see. I know I've been saying we've been writing a lot of tickets on NC State, but to see the handle on that game for NC State Duke in the Elite 8, and when we just launched in a state like North Carolina, was awesome to see.
With sports gambling launching, and if you're an NC State fan, you've really been able to take advantage.
Was there a difference in betting between the men's and women's teams for NC State?
Yeah, the women's team was a 3 seed, so they didn't have those long odds. There wasn't a huge, payout waiting for you if you took NC State. And the women's team that's captured all the attention is Iowa.
Because you have these massive stories in women's college basketball now with Caitlin Clark, LSU. That LSU-Iowa game was the most bet women's sporting event we've ever had. And I wouldn't be shocked if Iowa-UConn is close to that. And you talk about those games being played on the same day. I think the NC State women's against South Carolina is also going to have a massive handle as well, because after that Iowa-LSU game was played, you had UConn-USC, and that was the second most bet game of the day. The 2 women's Elite 8 games that day were the most bet events, more than the NBA, more than the MLB that day.
NC State still has a tough path. They'd have to play South Carolina, which is undefeated. and then to get to the national title game. And in the national title game, they'd either have to play UConn or Caitlin Clark in Iowa. So still a lot of value for NC State. Their women are also 16-1 to win the national title right now. And those odds got as high, I think, as 60-1. So never as quite as high as the men's team, but a 60-1 would be a great payout if you had taken them at that point. But the one thing is the interest in the women's tournament has really sparked a lot of betting.
Right.
I talked to BetMGM, Fanatics have both said that the women's tournament has attracted much more betting action than it has in the past.
Wow, and that's, I'm sure in part due to the Caitlin Clark phenomenon. But it's so cool that we're in this moment where we have both men's and women's NC State team in the tournament. So as we head into the Final Four, how big are the bets placed at this phase in terms of money, but also just like importance at this phase? Yeah,
there's, if you took NC State early, then you're probably just riding with that. The money will go up because there's much more eyeballs on it. So the volume of bets will go up. I don't know if the amount of money bet will go up, although I'm sure it will, just because there's more people betting. We'll see more prop bets now. How many rebounds does DJ Burns have, or how many points does DJ Horn score? I think we'll see more of those bets because, the future bets, the time to bet on who would win the national title, was a couple weeks ago. So now we'll see different types of bets. Who will win this game, or how many points will somebody score? All right. We're going to take a quick break right there, and we'll be right back. So, Brian, in your conversations with some of these betting operators, how much money has NC State's tournament run brought in so far? Yeah, well, right now the betting operators are actually on the hook, right? So if you bet North Carolina State 200-1 to win it, and let's say you bet $100, well, now that ticket could be worth $20,000, and so the sportsbooks see NC State as a huge liability for them. If NC State were to go ahead and finish this magical run, they would owe a lot more money out than if, say, Alabama were to win this thing. So right now, they're a huge liability. They're the biggest liability for Fanatics and for BetMGM, and I imagine it's the same across other platforms. And so that means they are rooting hard against NC State. The sportsbooks would like to see Purdue and Alabama in the final because both NC State and UConn have a lot of bets on them. Right. And what happens if they make it to the final? Obviously, we got to see who they're playing against. But are there differences with either scenario? Yeah, I think they'd be huge underdogs to Connecticut. They're a huge underdog against Purdue. So I think they're somewhere in the plus 340. So if you bet $100, you could win almost 3-1. Okay. If you bet on NC State, if they were playing UConn, I imagine that might be closer to 4-1 or 5-1. So they'll be huge underdogs if they play against Connecticut. If they play Alabama, which of course knocked North Carolina out of the tournament, they'll be underdogs as well. I don't think they'll be as big of an underdog against Alabama, but it just goes to they've been underdogs most of the way. The only game they were favored in was the second round game against Oakland, which went to overtime. But they've been underdogs in 3 out of the 4 games so far. And, as we look at all of this, what does this tell us about what we may see in future tournaments when it comes to North Carolina teams? Yeah, I asked this question to a lot of people about, do you see in a certain state, do you see more bets to the home teams? Mm-hmm. We're getting ready to have the NHL playoffs. The Carolina Hurricanes are the second favorite to win the title. I imagine in North Carolina, they'll be the most heavily bet team. Right. But when you factor in everybody, there are some national teams, the Cowboys, the Yankees, the Lakers, that will always be bet. But when you have a run like this, I think in-state you'll see a lot of bets placed on the local teams. And that makes sense, right? There's a rooting interest. You have lots of fans of those teams. Someone like North Carolina, for example, has a more national fan base, or Duke. You'll see bets spread out all over the country. But I think for NC State, the bettors here in North Carolina are kind of fueling this. All right. Well, thank you so much, Brian, and thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email that's waiting in your inbox every morning with local news, events, and headlines to get you ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.